everyone, today I'm going to be talking about rental applications. If you haven't seen the previous videos, we talked a little bit about what to consider before renting, before you even start, things like budget, things like bond, and all that stuff. And last week we also talked about inspecting a property, what to look out for when you're inspecting a property and how to make sure that you can get the changes to the property made before you move in if there's anything major that needs fixing. This week we're talking about the very next step that usually comes in the process. So first you do your budget, you get ready, you think about the place that you're after, you do the research, you look online. Second, you line up a inspection of the place so that you can actually see it, whether it's a virtual one or in person. And third, this week we are chatting about doing the application. So once you've found a property that you're interested in renting and you want to be in the bidding for, you will need to do an application. So we're going to chat a little bit about what to consider before you do your application, how to ensure that you have the best chances of getting a place, but also making sure that you're aware of things, deal breakers and things that you really want to make sure that you mention on the application as well. Alrighty, let's get into it. So we mentioned these briefly as well in the searching phase when you're looking for a property, to check whether they are actually pet friendly, like whether the landlord is like, yeah, pets are fine. You know, obviously you still need to do an application, but what they'll have is a little box that says pets considered. This is probably the best way to ensure that the places that you're going for are going to be okay with your current pet that you have. Luckily, and there was a bit of a special feature video that I did on the rental changes that are coming into place or have been coming into place gradually over the last year. Most of them are going to be made in February next year, but one that went through last year in July was that pets can't be discriminated on based just on, you know, whatever the landlord wants. So pets actually need to be seriously considered if you do an application, and they need a very good reason why they actually reject that application. So basically if they do reject your application to have a pet in a property, they need to have a pretty substantial reason why they're actually doing that. For example, if the property is inherently unsuitable for the animal, like for example you have no backyard but you're getting a dog. Dogs usually need backyards. You might be able to argue, for example, that you're going to take it to the park 5 times a day and walk at lights, and you know that is actually a valid thing that you can put down on an application. And you also need to show that the animal isn't, like for example, a farm dog that you're giving no backyard, because a farm dog would probably destroy a property. Not always, but probably. The other things that you need to consider are, like all of the other parts that your animals actually might really need for their well-being and their safety. It's like if it's going to be a pretty big risk for the landlord, they can reject it, but they actually have to prove that it is going to be a risk, not just that they don't like animals or that they're worried about damage, because you are still responsible for damage that the pets do. That's something to keep in mind as well. Just because this law has changed, it's about preventing discrimination, but it doesn't mean that you're not liable for any damage that your pets or your kids or anyone else in the property, you know, whether it's a spouse who's not on the lease or anybody does. So you still need to be aware of that. They can take that money from your bond if your pet pulls up the carpet or scratches the door or anything like that to repair that damage, and you're still responsible for maintaining the property. And at the end of your lease, if you're going to move on particularly, but at the end of your lease, making sure that the property is in really good nick, that it's the same that you state that you got it in, and so on and so forth. If you tick yes, they'll have a little spot where it's like, you know, do you have pets? You can say yes, and then you can put a spiel of like, you know, that you will safeguard the property and that you take it seriously and so on. That'll give you the best chance of getting considered for a rental application when you do have existing and current pets. Even kids, you know, unfortunately there can still be some discrimination that happens around those things. So try to put your best foot forward in being honest, but trying to be forward about like, this is what I do to prevent that, and obviously any rental history and stuff, but we'll go through that, that you've had will help to back that up. If you've got somebody who says, yep, they left the last property in good nick and you had your pet there, that's going to be really good evidence of like, yeah, you have a pet but you still look after the places that you're in. You might even be wondering where you actually find the rental application in the first place. It should be on their website. A lot of them have the downloadable form underneath the actual property that you're after applying for. But if they don't, make sure that you call or email the real estate and they should be able to send you a copy of the application. Or if you've got to go into the office, and they'll have paper application copies as well. The applications are printable, but you can usually also do them electronically. That helps if you don't have a printer. You can do electronic signatures and things like that on the application itself. So the application can be structured a bit differently depending on where you're moving in, like which real estate you're going through. But there'll usually be a few parts that are fairly similar. They probably will ask you things like as mentioned, whether you have pets, whether you have kids. They'll ask for your name, your current address. They'll also ask a little bit about your rental history. They'll probably also ask for references and referees, anyone that can vouch for the fact that you're a good tenant, that you try to keep places clean, or that you've tried to keep places in good nick. They'll also potentially ask for character references if you can provide these. It can be really hard if you don't actually have much rental history, but we will talk about some tips of like who to get and how to get them onto your rental application, even if you haven't had a lot of rental history. A few things that might prevent you from being successful in your application. There's a thing called the Tenant database, and this is actually where they can apply to have you put on this tenant database. If you're worried that there might be some negative information on there, then you can actually go to Consumer Victoria and you will be able to have a look and see if your name is on that database. If it is on there, what you'll need to do is you'll need to talk to your previous real estate, or if you were doing a private agreement, your landlord, and talk to them, because there are some pretty strict conditions of like why they can put you on there. Usually it's to do with outstanding rent or outstanding money that you owe. So if you can pay that back, then you can have your name cleared from that database. Or if you suspect you were put there unfairly, you can usually appeal it as well through VCAT and Consumer Vic. So head to that website, Consumer Vic, and just look up tenancy database, and you should be able to find that list. It's important because basically, if any of your current real estates are looking through that tenant database and they find your name on there, you are going to have probably a pretty poor chance of getting a rental, unfortunately. That can be really tricky. Another thing that they'll ask for on the application is they'll ask you when you plan to move in, because they want to know that it aligns with when the property is available. They want to have you in there probably as soon as close as possible to when it opens, mainly probably just to ensure that they get money sooner. So make sure that you factor in your current lease period with that as well. Try to line it up, if possible, a few days prior to your current lease ending, because that gives you time to clean the old place, move your furniture, check out the new place. You don't have all that stress of like everything has to be moved in this day or I'm homeless. So if you can create a crossover period, that's ideal as well. But again, as close to the period when the property is available from. If you're not sure when the property is available from, speak to your real estate or check the listing online. It should usually have available from, and it'll have the date under there. Rental references, as mentioned earlier, you will need rental references of some description. Unless there is very low demand for a property, if all the other applicants have a previous rental reference that they've rented from or that can vouch for their ability to look after a property they have stakes in, you're probably going to maybe not come up as good as them in terms of getting the property. So yeah, try to get some rental references. Now, if you're like, I haven't rented before, or I have nobody I can think that I can put on there, or if, for example, if maybe you had a negative experience the previous time, or your real estate really didn't like you for some reason or something like that, and you don't really want to put them on there because you're worried that they might say something negative or harm your chances of getting a place, then there are a few other workarounds. So firstly, you've got two types of references. You've got your character references, who can vouch for the fact they can say, yeah, they're like a really cool person, they're organized, they're great, and so on. And your rental references, which are those that can vouch for your actual rental history, like, hey, they've lived in a place, they paid me money, they kept the place in good nick. So firstly, the character references can be people like a mentor, a former boss. It can be, it probably should, if possible, be somebody who's been in a bit of a supervising or a bit of a mentor role in your life, somebody who, for example, if you volunteered somewhere and the coordinator at the place helped give you directions or helped to supervise you, that's valid. That would be a really great reference to put down as a character reference. If it's just a mate who hasn't really sort of worked with you in a supervising capacity before, it will still be better than nothing, but it probably won't be seen exactly the same as somebody who has actually, has that position and has, I suppose, supervised you and seen you, how organised you are, or seen, your good qualities in a more working type environment. So so try to get that if possible. It could even be, if you can't think of a former real estate or a former private landlord that you had a good experience with that you think will vouch for you. It could even be a friend or a family friend that you lived with or paid board to, or a parent. But if you don't have this, my best advice to you is still try to do the application and try to get in, but start paying board to somebody that you live with, whether it's a parent, a family friend, as mentioned earlier. Start paying board, because then when you put them down on your rental application, you can say, I consistently paid board to this person. It doesn't have to be much. It's just saying you can consistently pay money to a person, and that and just try to have that history of keeping the place clean and all that. The other option that you might have if you don't have that rental history, but you can't just stay with a family member or a friend or anything like that, is to consider share housing with others, because then if they have a bunch of people paying rent in a place, it might be less likely that the fact that you don't have a rental history is going to be a stronger factor, because they're not relying just on your finance to pay for the property and pay for their overheads and so on. So if you even consider applying with a friend who has that rental history, you will probably have a better shot at getting the place as well. And very big one, make sure that you actually talk to your references prior to putting them down. So give them a call, actually give them a heads up that you're going for a place. Obviously, if this can be hard, it can be tricky if it's your current real estate and you don't want to give them notice yet because you're worried that they'll fill the place and you want that backup. That's valid. You don't have to necessarily put them down, but if you don't have anybody else to put down, then you probably will have to put them down. Usually real estates won't call your references until they've your application is more of the top that they consider, but it's not a guarantee. So so you might be in that situation where your current real estate knows about it. It could even be worth just having a chat to your real estate and being like, hey, I am looking for a place, but if I don't find a place, I will continue to rent here as well. If it is your current real estate that you're going through for the property, that's sort of a bit, obviously they're going to know straight away, so there's not much that can be done about that, but have a little think about that as well. But try to let your references know, because it doesn't look good if they get a call and they're like, who is this, what, huh? They have no idea. It's like someone that you haven't seen in years, and they just have no clue what you're talking about or what they're talking about, because it'll just be, it doesn't make you look very organised, and it doesn't make you look very professional, I suppose, as well. So try to give them a heads up that they'll be expecting a call potentially, or an email to vouch as a reference. If your situation is more dire, for example, you were leaving a domestic violence situation or trying to leave a domestic violence situation, or if you are really struggling, like you just have no positive rental history or no rental history and you are just struggling in the market, make sure that you get in touch with Quantum Support Services, or for domestic violence specifically, get in touch with the Orange Door. Really important to try to get in touch with these services if you are struggling, because there are lots that they can do to help you, usually to help you to get a place, whether it's through social housing, whether it's through crisis accommodation or so on. So make sure that you get in touch with these people if you are experiencing domestic violence or homelessness crisis as well. If your rental place is wanting to do a credit check on you, they are allowed to do what's called a public credit search, but they're not allowed to do a private credit check on you. So if they ask you for like a comprehensive private credit check, that's illegal. That's no. So get in touch with Consumer Victoria if this is something that you experience, because yeah, they're not really allowed to ask for that. The other one is that don't put all your eggs in one basket. Keep trying to put different applications in different places, because if you sort of do all that waiting for one application and then that doesn't come through and you're on like a timeline, you might find yourself getting closer and closer to the date, and if you put all your eggs in one basket, you have less chances of getting somewhere before the end of your lease. There is the option usually with real estates to go on month by month lease. That might be a good option to negotiate with your real estate in advance, because if you go on to like a 6 or a 12-month lease for the same place, because you're like, I don't know if I'm gonna find a place, then you do find a place and you have to what's called break your lease, which is to end it earlier than the expected date. That can look really bad on future applications. Like the real estate might be a bit annoyed about that. They might disclose that to future places that you're applying to and so on. So breaking lease is sometimes necessary and understandable, and particularly if you have a very particular reason, for example domestic violence or family crisis and so on, that is valid, and like you need to do what you need to do, and you can make sure that you communicate that in future applications. But where possible, try not to break lease. So trying to go on a month by month lease for your current place is probably the better option. That way you can actually afford to pay, potentially if you get a place, you can still keep paying for the rest of the month at one place and then move into the next place. And you might be able to deal with the double up for like a few weeks or something like that in rent, but probably it will be a lot harder to try to pay 2 lots of rent until the end of, a 6-month lease, for example. That would be very expensive. Now, a few tips if you are finding that you keep putting in applications and you keep getting rejected. So you might be applying for places outside your budget, might be one of the reasons. So like, for example, if you're a low income earner and you're finding properties that are too expensive for your budget, even the cheap ones, there are actually some circumstances which can make you eligible for social housing through DHHS or through public housing through, for example, Community Housing Limited and so on. So make sure that you chat to DHHS. They may refer you on to Community Housing Limited to try to find a place as well, particularly if you're a low income earner. And there might even be some circumstances which make you eligible for a grant to help cover bond. My second bit of advice is ask an experienced family member or a friend to help look over your application and give some advice, because they might pick something up that you didn't even think about. If you've had to break your lease in the past, they might be passing you over because of that. So your previous real estate might be mentioning that on the phone, and they might be like, oh, I don't want someone who breaks lease. There's not a lot that you can do, but again, applying for that share house situation will probably be a sure bet with somebody that hasn't broken lease previously or hasn't a previous recent rental reference where they haven't broken lease, because it gives them insurance that someone else will be able to cover rent if you break your lease again. As mentioned earlier, if you've had to break your lease because of special circumstances such as unexpected loss, domestic violence, or other circumstances outside your control, make sure you mention this and try to provide evidence if possible. It sucks that you have to go through that, but try to provide some evidence, whether it's like a death certificate, whether it's you know, Orange Door. If you went through them for family violence stuff, they might be able to chat to the real estate and be like, yeah, like this was a family violence situation that needs to be considered. Having an agency give them that information will help ensure your chances of getting a future property as well. So yeah, try to get that sorted if you can. If you're really concerned that you're being discriminated against, like you're like, I can't think of a reason why I'm not getting these places, or for example, if like you notice that they were a bit hostile towards you, or they made an offhanded comment about something like your you know, they might have said something like, oh gosh, you know, you're going to ask us to put in a ramp, aren't you, you know, if you're in a wheelchair, or if there was something that indicated that there might be just some discrimination there, chat to Australian Human Rights Commission and Consumer Affairs. They may be able to give you some pointers of like what you can do in that situation, and how to tackle it to try to get a better outcome as well. Sometimes it's hard to know if you're being discriminated against. Unfortunately, a fair bit of discrimination can happen behind closed doors. You won't even know that you are being discriminated against. It's a little bit to do with the way that the rental application system is put into place. So rather than like a first in, first served sort of, where there's that transparency where you can see where you are in the waiting list, and there's like, they have to give clear reasons why you're rejected and so on and so forth. There aren't currently those safeguards to make sure that that's the case. So just know that it is a frustrating system, and that there are some shortfalls in that system. That means that sometimes you don't even know you're being discriminated against. Even for like things like having kids, unfortunately, some people with kids do experience that rental discrimination, where they might just be anticipated to be damaging the property, and so people might not even give them a chance if they've got young kids, or if you've got pets and so on. Even if you are very like, I have a good history, I will make sure this doesn't happen, I will pay my bonds, I will make sure the place is in good nick. But if you're worried about that, get in touch with Australian Human Rights Commission, and they can point you in the right direction of how to go about that situation. If you are really worried that you're getting discriminated against, they might be able to, for example, help you draft an email to the real estate just requesting the reason that your application was rejected, because once they give you a reason, then you can judge whether it's discrimination or likely to be discrimination based off that reason. For example, if they give you a reason that totally out of your control, or they give you a reason that you actually had that, then you can say, hey, I actually had that thing that you told me I got rejected for, and then you can go from there in that situation. Because over time, if a lot of places are discriminating against you, it can cause a real headache in terms of finding a place. So yeah, do what you need to do. Alright, well, I hope this has been informative. I hope it's been good. Next week we're going to talk about, once you've gotten accepted for a place, what are you going to do to get it all set up, to get it all sorted, to be ready to move in. And then from there we'll keep going. We'll talk about the whole process from start to finish. Make sure that you watch back any of the other videos if you've missed any, and I will chat to you next week. Alright, see you later.